Max, what is the smallest metropolitan area in population that has all five major league sports teams?
That's a good question, and I definitely feel like we should know this one. But we'll talk about it and figure it out at the end of the show.
Absolutely.
G-Train to Church Avenue, next stop Classen Avenue. Stand clear, close door.
Welcome to the Urban Files, a show that provides news and analysis on a variety of city-related topics. How we live, work, play, and move around in the cities we love. Join your hosts, Max and Chuck, as they cover the latest news from the American urban landscape. So Chuck, I did something a bit unusual this past weekend. I went to Orlando. That's not unusual, obviously, but this time I decided not to drive.
Oh, nice.
I wasn't going to need a car while I was there, and I was going by myself, so I decided to take Amtrak. Well, the main reason was my Amtrak points were going to expire later this year, so I've been looking for a chance to use the train, and this was as good a time as any. So
was it good?
The train was comfortable. It was $41, which I would say is very reasonable for this route. It was a bit slow compared to driving, and it was behind schedule by the time we arrived. But hey, relaxing and doing work instead of driving was totally worth it to me.
Yeah, because you're using your time then, right? And I understand you were also getting in a little bit of a rugby tournament, right?
Yeah. Maybe we'll talk about that another time. But
okay, gotcha. Yeah.
I was pretty happy with my experience coming back. I actually, because of the scheduling, I took Red Coach instead, which is supposed to be sort of a higher end luxury service. It was fine. So my reality was more like in line with Megabus or Bolt Bus, which are, if you're not familiar, those pretty basic but affordable coach services. So I was happy. It was only $15 to come back, and it was a good experience. Happy with everything, but I'll say that once Virgin Trains is running that route, I'm probably going to want to pay a premium for that. Yeah.
Hey, that's understandable. And, I'm glad it worked out well, and I'm glad you had a really good trip,
Yeah. What about you?
So I've been nose to the grindstone of late. We're only one more week up in the school year. I just drove to Orlando myself for a meeting with my doctoral advisor. I'm working on that. So that was, it was tough, but, we figured out more where we're supposed to go. But, this week I really wanted to focus on some sad news that came out last week. And it was about the passing of one of the more famous modern architects there is, I.M. Pei. He passed away at 102. So he really lived, but he was really able to live a remarkable and full life. And I just think about all that he saw. He was born in 1917, really during World War I, and really just out of the Qing dynasty and into the initial Republic of China. And not only that, but some of his buildings were just transformative to the American urban and architectural landscape. He designed the Louvre pyramids, which, while highly controversial, they really were trend-setting, and they really kind of married modern and historic architecture, which I guess really, I don't think, well, he had modern buildings before, it wasn't really done like that. So it was kind of and then also, of course, the Bank of China Tower in Hong Kong, which I believe was the first super tall building above 1,000 feet in the Asian continent, outside of the US, in fact. And it was the first one built without reinforced concrete. So it's one of the most innovative structures ever built in terms of allowing similar upward growth in Asian cities. And of course, even in my hometown of Cleveland, he built the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So as I was growing up there, it was my first impression on a modern structure like this. And so he always I always had him in my mind, and I had a lot of respect for what he did. So I just wanted to give him a shout out.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I'm glad you did. I can't pretend to be an architecture buff, but I definitely remember him. My dad being a very proud person of Chinese heritage. He always would talk about I.M. Pei, and I remember that from when I was a little boy. So, now I'm in Miami. There's a rather iconic building now known as the Miami Tower, one of Miami's tallest. And, that building's jumped out to me a few times when I'm downtown, because with the Metro Mover running alongside it, there's a lot of interesting angles, and it really is one of the few areas I'd say in South Florida that really feels like a major urban city.
So much of Miami and so many cities have been shaped by his hand. So a lot of respect there.
Yeah, definitely. So Chuck, I know you were in Dallas recently. Did you make it out to Arlington?
I did, yes. And I got to see a Rangers game. And while I was there, I saw it right next to this relatively nice park, Globe Life Park. I saw Globe Life Field coming up, and the new one, latest and greatest, right next
Gotcha.
to it.
You were at a Rangers game. Perfect. Well, yeah. Just like you said, Globe Life Field is the latest, greatest state-of-the-art ballpark under construction. It is now projected to cost $1.2 billion and be completed in March of next year. The taxpayers of Arlington have contributed $461 million so far of their total commitment of $500 million. And for the city, it will take 30 years to pay this loan off. Arlington sounds familiar. That's because it is also the location of Jerry's World, aka AT&T Stadium, where the Dallas Cowboys play. And that facility cost $1.1 billion to build, of which the city of Arlington contributed $325 million back in 2005. So going into massive debt to serve the whims of a private enterprise, essentially, just so this sports team that you may or may not support doesn't move 20 minutes down the street in this case, because the city of Dallas was really suspected to be the alternative site. Anyway, could this deal, ransom, be seen as a positive?
So I think that it can. And the thing is obviously it's the way of the business, and it's, put in a neighborhood example, it's like, oh, they have a pool, why don't we build a pool too? It showed me a couple things. So for one thing, Dallas is such an economic powerhouse that not one, not two, to go LeBron James words, all five of the big five professional sports leagues are in Dallas. They have the NHL, and none of the other major southern cities can claim that. So I think from an economic competitiveness and entertainment standpoint, it shows something they have that none of the other cities do. I think the other thing that helps here is that in opposition to having it be right in a central downtown real estate location, that land is kind of away from the city center. And so the land that might be sitting otherwise idle for many days a year, which is one of the primary complaints against these stadiums deals, is that it's away from everything. So it's not going to necessarily interfere with things like that. And it might even spur additional growth and innovation. Like I know there's the Texas Live complex, and they're hoping to have additional hotels and all that around there. But more than that, I think you hope that it might be a regional draw. So for instance, when I and my wife were looking to do a couple days on the way back, one of our primary decision makers in going to Dallas and later spending time around town was going to the park for a game. And we also ended up going to Fort Worth and other places around there. So Indianapolis is a prime example of a city that perhaps benefited more than Dallas. They actually have two downtown venues. They have one for the Pacers and one for the Colts. And they've kind of used the recent hosting of the Super Bowl as kind of a catapult to rebrand the city. Right now, it is a city in the Midwestern United States, which is growing in the metro population. The economy is growing. And the downtown area has over 300 retail shops, 30 museums, 12 theaters. So I think it's one of those things where you're not going to see the immediate benefit, but I think it is there at least on the surface of having the teams and the venues available.
You're right. Indianapolis has seen a massive transformation in the last 3 decades or so. It's among the few that can be used as a positive example. But yeah, and overall, you're right though. Actually, I'll be fair. I mentioned that Arlington took out this huge $325 million loan for the AT&T Stadium, which was also supposed to be a 30-year loan. But to their credit, due to very conscientious planning and strict budgeting and higher than anticipated revenues, I guess, Arlington has been paying its loan back at an accelerated rate. And they were even on pace to pay it off in 2 more years. So it would have been like 14 years sooner than projected. So,
That's
and part of that is kind of what greased the wheels, I guess, for the Globe Life Field project, because they did so well with that. And so, the leaders over in Arlington clearly understand the economics and have sound, reasonable expectations for paying back this debt.
Yeah. Well, they had the public buy, and I completely agree. They had the public buy-in as a result of that previous success, and I think a lot of times we hear about so much about these non-examples because there are so many of them. I mean, I think really going to the far end of bad deals would be like the Olympics and the World Cup, where there's been, I mean, this is like chump change, like compared to like Brazil and Russia spending like 40, 50 billion. And a lot of people never seen that infrastructure. That's really been where I think now there's a much more of an awakening in terms of, okay, so if we're going to do this, how are we actually going to do this? I noticed actually that Stockholm had pulled out previously of the bidding for the 2026 Winter Olympics, and they actually recently re-entered it because the IOC specifically made talks about, okay, we're going to take specific steps to make sure this actually works for the citizenry. So I think that to give them credit, I think that there is more of a movement towards being aware of that. Back to, and I recommend John Oliver's original lambasting of this concept.
Yeah.
Do you think that in the long run that a deal like this can be made more sustainable or in other ways? Or I guess the challenge is for a smaller market. I mean, okay, in Dallas, great, you'll fill up a 50,000 seat stadium, but what about in somewhere that's not Dallas?
Yeah. Well, the question, I mean, it's similar to our discussion last week about tax subsidies for huge corporations like Amazon. Whether they need it or not, these businesses have the leverage to demand major concessions from the jurisdictions that are fortunate to have them in their communities, right? So, in the case of corporate welfare, I said that there was pretty much, no end in sight to me. But with cities subsidizing sports teams, I think, it's sometimes it's so unsustainable that we will see something change eventually. Not necessarily imminently, but with the situation being so dire, I can see different ways that the system will correct itself at some point, whether it's a change within the actual structures of the sports leagues themselves, or something kind of forced down by some sort of government legislation. Because compared to the corporate relocations, I see two major differences. First of all, businesses that receive incentives are almost entirely going to receive those through tax credits and abatements, other soft benefits, maybe like changes in legislation or whatever. But simply the cities and states are for the most part, they're not reaching directly into their pocketbooks to offer actual upfront cash. With the stadium deals, that's what they're doing, and in mega eye-popping fashion, Yeah. So secondly, sports franchises usually have some kind of emotional, sentimental attachment that forces cities and fan bases to just bend over even more. I mean, it's no longer just a business decision with a financial bottom line that's easy to analyze, but it's more of a save the team at all costs because our pride and emotional state, it depends on it, beyond financial measure, that type of mentality. And, at some point I see some type of correction coming, and it may be small, it may be something minor, but something that just keeps this stuff in check, I think, moving forward. Because the demands for new or majorly renovated facilities just keeps increasing in frequency and in cost, higher and higher price tags. I mean, it's gotten really crazy. And I think in the future we'll see ways where these facilities can generate more consistent types of revenue. You don't want to see NFL stadiums being built for 10 Sundays a year. There's definitely been a lot more use out of those stadiums now, and we can see more shared revenue and other mutually beneficial processes for how the deals are constructed that would lessen the upfront burden on the government.
And I think you're right. Like, I think that's like, there's that upward trajectory. And going back to your point about the team into pride and leaving at all costs, I'll mention my hometown again. So Cleveland, I think really one of the big issues, because I don't think teams really did this at this level until the 1995 Cleveland Browns, when everyone was like, oh, the Browns would never really Cleveland, and oh, they did. And a team like that with that level of love and passion for the city, I think it scared so many cities in that owners said, ooh, look, we can. And I know that Modell at the time was really innovative in terms of getting the max cap revenue, in terms of just. And so I think you're right that there is that, like, things just keep rising up. But at a certain point, attendance is starting to spike off. I think even ratings in some levels are. And so there will be that market correction. And I do. I think there's a bubble, and at some point it will pop. So speaking of bubbles in real estate, I just wanted to give a shout out to our sponsor. Real Estate IQ is #1 in deal finding and is the premier real estate investment software in Texas. Trusted by over 5,000 active investors, Real Estate IQ offers thousands of dollars with motivated seller leads for a fraction of the price. The company is expanding to Georgia and Florida and is seeking enthusiastic partners to join and help explode the business. Visit their website at www.realestateiq.com for more information.
Cool. Before we move on to our next topic, I was going to do a quick update from our last show, because Virgin Trains USA has broken ground on its Orlando extension. So, I mean, we knew that was coming, but they've officially broken ground. And in other news, they also sold their 2 office buildings, along with the retail centers, adjacent to the Miami Central train station. So that was interesting. They sold it for, I think it was $160-something million. So I was a little surprised that they did that so quickly. I guess they needed the cash, but that's speculation.
Yeah. So it's good they got it moving forward, however they were able. Moving on to our next topic. So complete streets. This might be something that some have heard about before. It's on some level polarizing, but it's gaining increasing traction. So after World War II in many cities, and really even prior to that, the automobile took over as the dominant method of transportation. And really it became the only method of transportation if you think about the highway system, and you think about the broad, sprawling streets of suburban America that really made any other form of transportation either unreasonable or potentially dangerous. So complete streets is a transportation policy and design approach that requires streets to be planned, designed, operated, and maintained to enable safe, convenient, and comfortable travel and access for users of all ages and abilities regardless of their mode of transportation. I know that it allows for an increased focus on walking, cycling, but also including those that are driving automobiles, riding public transportation, or delivering goods. So it's been advocated by transportation planners and city planners around America. And while it had already been coming to fruition in a number of Western cities on a higher level, the city of St. Petersburg, staying in our home current state of Florida, has just recently approved the plan in spite of some potential arguments about, whether it slows down traffic or some business owners have been complaining about it. Overall, it has gone through, and the city is implementing a plan on a citywide basis. It's something that they'll be moving forward with time and will have a positive impact on the city. But Max, what I wanted to ask you was, do you think there's anything missing with this plan, or what do you think would be able to potentially make this a little better?
Right. Well, first of all, I applaud St. Petersburg for taking up this initiative. The complete streets concept is really foundational for improving quality of life in modern cities. The world increasingly urbanizes. We've got to remain cognizant of everyone and everything that utilizes our roads. So, with that in mind, it's hard to really pick apart anything in this plan. I'll be honest, the implementation plan that they published is over 100 pages long, and
yes, it's
thick,
yes. Some light reading.
But one thing that always needs to be watched with a careful eye, though, is how all the parties can stay engaged and contribute to this vision. The city has a cohesive plan, which is great, and then they need the buy-in from the business community and the public, and it seems like they've done a really good job of achieving that, but with all their public engagement and outreach. But what remains to be seen is whether the follow-through from all three of these groups continues to be complementary and sustained. So questions like how can businesses encourage employees or encourage customers to bicycle more, for example? How can businesses be less reliant on vehicular parking? How can the city improve transit to make walking more attractive? These are different things that need to be considered on an ongoing basis, I think, for this overall plan to be successful.
And I think I'd agree with those points. I think there's one thing to implement something, but then there's another. Habits that people form are generally far more powerful than any incentive to necessarily change them on a direct level. So, for instance, I know that Copenhagen now is one of the world's most popular cities for bicycling, but that wasn't just the roads that they built. That was a generalized focus on cycling infrastructure. And I have so the Bicycling magazine actually came out with a list of things that they thought were important to the ranking system. And St. Petersburg ranked about, I think, 33rd in the country, which is very good for a southern city. I think Seattle was number 1 in their index, and maybe the highest ranked southern city was Austin, and I think Gainesville might have been a little ahead, but of course those are college towns. We're not comparing like with like there.
Right.
The qualities they emphasized were safety, friendliness, energy, and the culture around cycling. And I think the safety thing is still probably one of the bigger holdups. I know that in the article, one of the St. Pete reporters on this, it said that traffic accidents were already down and that miles per hour was already slowing down as well. I think this is the big thing to focus on. And I think it's a rate of 7 fatalities per year. And there's the League of American Cyclists actually published a link talking about how I think the most dangerous metros, and many of them are still in Florida. I think the St. Petersburg area itself is 9th. So I think it's one of those things where you really there has to be a critical mass of people doing it, and it has to be an awareness that, okay, this is available to us, and we can enjoy this and thrive. There's so many benefits to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what type of realistic impact do you think this will have on the city, St. Petersburg? So
my hope is that it will cut down on the overall safety issues. If it is slowing down traffic speeds, I think that's already one promising thing. I also think that it might shape the built environment a little bit, where you already have in St. Pete, you have the Pinellas Trail, and it's a 38-mile kind of, I don't know if it's a railed trail, but it's a cross-county thing in Pinellas, starting in St. Pete and ending up in Tarpon Springs. And I wonder if, similar to there's transit-oriented development in other cities, there's certain get-off points, like there's a St. Petersburg College at one exit, there's a mall, there's something else. And I wonder if the fact that people now have the option of cycling might spur additional development around those places, especially if there's these nodes, like 28th Avenue North is going to have a separate lane and everything. Mm-hmm. And so my hope is that will both make the city more livable, but also spur the economic development. Maybe employers want to consider business there, as opposed to I think there's this Silicon Valley kind of mindset of, oh, you can find certain things out. You can find bicycling, you can find just the infrastructure for that kind of lifestyle that doesn't really seem to exist at this time in Florida. Yeah. And so I'm hoping that if you build it, will kind of come through for them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's an often overlooked impact of infrastructure, like transit infrastructure, or in this case, the complete streets infrastructure. a lot of times people focus on the actual utilization of it and don't consider the how it affects the actual built environment. Definitely building infrastructure can be done in such a way that you influence in a positive way how the city is developed, from the private sector, how it's developed around that infrastructure that's created. So if we build highways, suburban style, curvy, dead end roads, private developers will cater to that style. And, if we want to be more urban, better planned, better organized, then if we build infrastructure the right way, then the development will follow that too. Cool.
The outputs, yes.
Yeah. All right, we'll take a quick break and then we'll come back with our over under. Hi, this is Max, one of your hosts on the Urban Files. I want to thank you for listening and let you know that if you're interested in the type of discussions we have on the show, please also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, where we share more content like this. Just head to facebook.com/theurbanfiles and you'll find links to the rest of our social media. Thanks again, and back to the show. All right, welcome back. We've got our over under segment. We're looking for a better name, but for the meantime, that's our working title. In light of the U.S. Census estimates coming out, well, for MSAs, they came out a few weeks ago, and actually today, the city estimates came out. I don't know if you had a chance to look at those or not. There's some interesting things there, but anyhow, we're going to kind of focus our over under on population numbers. So first one, I guess over under for this is really before or after. We'll say 2035, before or after, when the next U.S. Census has Raleigh and Durham in the same MSA once again.
So that's an interesting one, and I think initially my thought is that it will happen before then. Uh-huh. My understanding of, and you can correct any part of this, but my understanding of the MSA factoring is that a certain degree of commuters are doing business or having relationships in a certain area or whatever. And I know that Durham was originally kind of more of an industrial city and in nature, along with the educational institutions that are there, and then of course Raleigh being the state capital and kind of more of a center of commerce for that part of the state. I think that it will happen sooner rather than later because of the fact that so many people are now kind of intertwining between both. You have Research Triangle Park, you have Cary, which is kind of like having residents of both. So I think as long as there's not a over pride from anyone on either side where they're like, oh no, we want to be separate or something, like I know like Ann Arbor is not a part of Detroit's MSA right now. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic there too, where they kind of want to be separate, but otherwise they really should be a part of the same MSA.
I'm a little hazy as well on exactly how the OMB calculates this, how they distinguish the MSAs. But yeah, no, I'm with you. I mean, I guess my own personal experience in that region, I was noticing how spread out the development was between those different cities there. And I guess that's the one thing that I remember most is there seems to be a lot of undeveloped or less developed areas between the major cities in the Triangle region. And, I would just assume that as development continues to fill in, you'll see a lot more cross commuting, and yeah, I think I mean the same way as you. By 2030, I would think that they'll be the same MSA. All right, same idea. Before or after, over under 2035 for Orlando and Tampa being a potentially combined statistical area.
Now this one's more interesting, and the reason I think it's more interesting is, in terms of whether it will happen or not, is of course there's the recent news of Lakeland, and they have a major freight, or I think it's like a flight center, and that they announced significant work coming there. I think that, and along with Lakeland's already kind of, it's a place that I think people think of as just a Passover kind of drive over place, but it's significant. It's growing at a steady rate. You have Publix headquarters there. You have a lot of, it's already amazing how much continuous activity there is between the two metros.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that might stop it from being a single combined statistical area when I think about this is when I think about like Washington and Baltimore, that's one that's a single one that kind of functions as a unit, and like San Francisco, San Jose too. And the thing that makes me think that it might not is Orlando and Tampa are similarly sized cities at this point, and I think Tampa's a little larger. Orlando maybe a little more of a growth trajectory with kind of different industries also. And so my reason that I might say no is one of those two is going to be potentially the alpha in that deal, and one of those is going to be the beta first. And so my thing is, who is going to be willing in this case to take that secondary role? Because it seems like in most cities around, I mean, I think the exception being the Rhine-Ruhr region of Germany, there's usually an alpha and then there's betas, there's subsidiaries. So that's kind of my reason that I'm thinking they will function together, but maybe not like that.
So what are you saying? Yeah, before?
I'm just saying no. I'm saying no. Just,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that is a big jump. And I would also, not trying to copy you, but yeah, I'm leaning that way as well. And another question in my mind is the Orlando CSA actually includes Daytona Beach, which has always been sort of a somewhat of a surprise, because Daytona seems to be more is pretty far from Orlando and kind of functions separately. So it's always been a little bit puzzling that Daytona is included with that CSA. So if Tampa came into the mix, you'd have St. Petersburg, up to Spring Hill, all the way across to Daytona. I mean, you're covering the entire span of Florida, and that is, again, I'm not an expert on how they formulate these, but that would then be a bit eye-opening.
It seems like it would pose challenges, just from a pride standpoint. I mean, because right now even Lakeland Winter Haven is its own, and then I'm down in just recently moved, and I'm in I'm actually only about a half an hour south of Tampa and 25 minutes from St. Pete, but yet I'm still in the Bradenton, Sarasota, Northport MSA at this point, technically. So it's kind of funky. Yeah.
All right. Moving along. We're running out of time here, but we'll try and hurry. Same thing, 2035. For a Dallas CSA, are you over or under on a 10 million population?
I'm going to take the over, because just as it's taking its continuous rate of trajectory, it's incredible. And Dallas just seems to have more and more room to grow. And so I really think that as long as nothing catastrophic happens there, which I don't think weather-wise they're as at risk to Houston. And in some ways, I think Houston will start to lose to Dallas in some level. I think they might even get there by 2030, because right now they're at over 8 million right now. And I think I looked at it was in 2000 census, Dallas is at 5.2 million, and they're already at 7.5 just at the MSA. So I think with that trajectory of growth, if it continues, they'll get there. Yeah.
Just to clarify, when I said 2035 when I said 2035, I should have said 2030 then, I guess. I should because there's not going to be.
No, but what I meant is I think they'll get there.
Yeah, by 2030. Yeah. So that's what I should have said. I should have asked 2030, will they be over or under 10 million? And I guess I'm with you too. I mean, it's really, it's hard to, see this freight train of Texas growth slowing down anytime. It's hard to imagine that they would have grown the way they have. So I guess there's that. But yeah, I mean, I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. So yeah, no, I'm with you. All right, last one. This isn't quite an over-under. It's a little different, but we just stuck it in here anyhow. So again, looking at the population numbers, which sort of struggling / shrinking MSA will start growing again first? We've got 5 that we're looking at: Chicago, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Hartford, and Buffalo. which one do you think? All five of these metros have been seeing sort of a up and down year over year growth since the last census, and what do you think? Which one will get things turned around first?
So I think actually Buffalo will be the first one to kind of turn around its numbers, and the reason I think that is there's twofold. So for one thing, Buffalo has a location in Western New York where, as New York State goes, New York City has much of the population that is in its surroundings, but there's also a lot of people in rural upstate New York. And I think that rural population is going to have an increasingly difficult time moving forward in terms of being in those areas. I think it's already happening and will continue to happen in terms of even some of the smaller cities around it. Like I know Rochester is actually bleeding population right now at an accelerated trajectory from Buffalo. Mm-hmm. And so I think that will help kind of having a single Western New York spot to have them go like kind of attract to. And the other thing I think that helps them is the Toronto area right across the border. And so that's just such a rapidly accelerating area, but it's also a very expensive area. Mm-hmm. And so I think that as the Golden Horseshoe, as Toronto's metro is known, continues to expand, I think that you'll see more hypercommuters. I think you'll see people that are looking at the values of real estate in Western New York and in Buffalo, which is just shocking at this point. And I think that increasingly, as we become more international too, people will be willing to take that trip.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting take. I hadn't considered crossing the border. But you're right. I mean, Toronto's growth has been huge. And, while it's a couple hours away, that whole Golden Horseshoe, like you said, also has been seeing growth flowing from the Toronto region. So, that's interesting. I hesitate to throw, something out there on my end because this is a tough one to project.
Yes.
Because the underlying sort of trends haven't really revealed much, in my opinion.
No.
I just from gut, I might go with Pittsburgh. I feel like their continued population loss seems to defy what's been happening with economic development and actual physical development as well. So I mean, it's odd, but I feel like eventually that's got to turn around. People often throw out factors like death and low birth rates in Pittsburgh, and sort of a generational kind of demographic issue for why that is. But I think it's got to turn around at some point. Chicago also has a ton of potential, but just simply because of its size and what it's had going for it economically, and just being such a dense, built up kind of city, but at the same time, I mean, it's hard to see how they turn around with their tax issues and government kind of slowly spiraling in the wrong direction. So, I'm going to go with Pittsburgh, but this one's a toss-up.
Yeah.
Welcome back, everyone, for our final segment. Today, our trivia question is: what is the smallest metropolitan area that has all 5 major sports leagues, the team present? So just to clarify, that would be the MLB, the NBA, the NFL, the MLS, and the NHL. So Max, what are your thoughts?
Shoot. This is kind of like naming the 50 states, right? It's like I feel like I know them, but can I do it, especially when I'm on the spot? Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you right now, I'm just trying to go down the list by population and see where I land. I'm thinking right now I'm at Detroit. I can't remember if there's an MLS team there or going to be, if it's included in the latest round of expansion. But actually, I'm thinking Minneapolis as well. Minneapolis should have all 5. Because they've got the MLS now finally.
Yeah,
Minneapolis, St. Paul would have the Vikings, the Timberwolves, the Wild, the Twins, and then the I don't even know the name of the franchise for the soccer.
It's Minnesota United FC, and they just came in this year, which makes it so tricky.
Right. There you go. So, right now, since I'm going first, I'll pick Minneapolis, St. Paul. But I'm going to take another 20 seconds to try and think if there's a smaller metro. So where are you at, Chuck?
So where I'm at is, I'm thinking about this, and Minneapolis was a strong thought that came to mind. The other one that really came to mind, and I was thinking about geographic isolation, and I was thinking maybe Denver, because they have the Rockies, I think the Nuggets, and I drove past the MLS arena, and of course you got the Broncos and oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank now. The Avalanche, right? See, the question for me is, which of those is the smallest area? And so that's kind of one of those where, my inclination is to lean towards Denver, but I could go towards Minneapolis also. And, they're both growing fast, so it's kind of hard to keep track.
Yeah, you're right. Shoot. That's another question, because you're correct. Denver has all five, and they definitely benefit from the geographic isolation, like you said. Their fan footprint really covers that whole mountain region.
Yeah.
I can't remember, and I should know this. This is driving me nuts. With the number of times I look at the population statistics, I really ought to know this. Yeah. I'm not sure. So since I said Minneapolis, I'm just gonna make that my answer.
Okay. Yeah.
And roll with Denver, and we can find out what is the correct answer here.
Yeah. So I think I'll go with Denver, with the caveat that I think that could be wrong within the next 2 years, because I think Denver is really taking off population-wise, just like at an unbelievable rate for such a city size too. So let's go ahead and figure it out. So it is actually, Denver is the 19th largest metro in the US, and Minneapolis is 16th.
Yeah.
Now, Denver is growing twice as fast as Minneapolis. So it's one of those things where, depending when you ask it, it could go either direction. But for now, I believe the answer is Denver.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, Denver carries the crown. Smallest metro with all 5 big league sports teams.
Congrats, Denver. Yeah, that's a great standard of living there. You got sports and you got hiking, and I don't know what else you need.
Yeah. All right. That was fun, Chuck.
It was, yes. Absolutely. Yep. Have a good one, everyone.